Hello and welcome to the Shift Book Club. I'm creator of The Shift, Sam Baker. I'm a journalist, writer and broadcaster, and I'm delighted to be here with Eleni Kyriacou, author of our April book club pick, The Unspeakable Acts of Zina Pavlou. The novel based on the true story of the second to last woman to be hung in England, a Greek Cypriot grandmother who barely spoke any English, and a woman who, unlike the last woman, Ruth Ellis, hardly anybody has ever heard of. I've known Eleni a horribly long time, and do you know what else? I was just trying to work out how long it was, and it definitely begins with a nine, doesn't it? So it's got to
Yeah,
be coming up to 30 years.
it's easily 30 years. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
Half,
God, that's
half my
horrifying.
life.
That, that
Should I
be,
just throw that
oh,
in? Half my life?
yeah. Oh my God,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's horrifying. And we met when Eleni interviewed me for a job on New Woman, yet another defunct magazine. I was lucky enough to get it, and Eleni was my boss for the next few years. And as I just said, she's been my friend for 30 plus years, as well as deputy editor and editor of New Woman. Eleni is an award-winning editor and journalist, and she's written for The Guardian, Observer, You Magazine, Grazia, Red, loads of others. Zina Pavlou, I should say I should give it its whole name, just for a second time. The Unspeakable Acts of Zina Pavlou. I haven't got a paperback. I think the paperback cover is even nicer than that. And that's all loads and loads of fabulous quotes saying how wonderful it is. It's a second novel. Her first, She Came to Stay, is very different, but it's also about the Greek Cypriot experience in London in the 1950s. And I hope we'll get time to talk about that a bit too. It isn't really a spoiler situation this month because it's based on a true crime and we do all know how it ended. And I've just said that in the intro anyway. But do pop a note in the chat box if you haven't quite finished, just so we know. And certainly if you haven't read the end note. So welcome, Eleni. This is really quite weird.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. Hi, everyone.
Let us start with the very obvious question, which is to tell us about the inspiration for the novel.
Okay. Well, I was actually doing a bit of research for my first book, and I went to an exhibition, which was a crime exhibition, as you do. So it was all about murder and crime, and it was run by Scotland Yard. And there I just saw these like two or three lines from the executioner Albert Pierpoint, who's famous executioner who executed Ruth Ellis. And it was just a little quote, and it said something along the lines of, when he executed Ruth Ellis, he got a lot of criticism for executing a woman. And a journalist said to him, how could you? How could you execute a woman? And he'd said in his memoirs years later, um, I didn't say anything at the time, but where were they 6 months before when a 53-year-old Cypriot woman went to the gallows? Or wasn't she, something along the lines of, or wasn't she glamorous and young enough? Or was it because she wasn't attractive enough, you know? And I just thought, I was a 53-year-old Cypriot woman at the time. And I just thought, who is this person? Who was the person before Ruth Ellis? And so I sort of went away and started researching, and I found all the records of Stilu Christofi, who is the inspiration for this book, who is the woman who was accused of killing her daughter-in-law, Hella. Yeah, so that's how it all began, really.
So how did you go about researching it? Was there much information? Because like with Ruth Ellis, all you need to do is turn on the internet and there it goes.
There wasn't, what amazed me was that nobody had really written about it before, and it felt like this, almost like this secret, and I felt compelled. I thought, this is the journalist in me was like, oh my God, no one knows this story. I have to do something with it. And you know that kind of slightly sick feeling of someone's going to get to it before you. But the
Yeah,
way I
yeah.
started researching it is a friend of mine worked at National Archives, and she said to me, well, everything will be there. And I thought I'd never really used the National Archives before. So I went
Yeah.
along and I just typed in her name, and they had all the police records and her statements and various things. And so I trawled through those, took like copies of those and whatever. But what was missing crucially was the trial transcript. And it turns out that that hasn't been made, it was made public, but then it was held back. I think some members of her family in Cyprus have since said that they don't want that released. And it just got me thinking about the way she was treated, because I saw a lot of the press reports, and you can get an idea of what happened in the trial, through the press reports of the day, which are out there in the public domain, and you hear that, you know, the prosecutor called her, he said it was a stupid crime by a stupid woman. I've got lots of her letters that were translated into English and letters she wrote out. So a lot of the book, or the facts of the book, so the crime and her letters in and out of prison and stuff like that, that is all inspired by what, you know, the documents I actually found. And then I thought, I realized she didn't speak any English and she couldn't read or write Greek. And it fascinated me that the whole story for her whole experience was translated for her by what were about three, possibly four male translators. And at the time, translating it wasn't the kind of job it is now. It wasn't respected. It wasn't a profession. It was just anyone who could speak a language. The Met Police had a list of people, and they literally would stick their head into the local cafe and go, anyone here can speak Greek? And someone would go, yeah, me. And they would just hire them on a freelance basis for a few shilling, you know, for an hour or
They
two.
literally did that.
Literally, because I spoke to a woman that trained interpreters, and her sister used to be an interpreter in the 50s, and literally they would just have a list of people, and one of those people was actually a petty criminal himself and was put in prison. So it was very unregulated. So that just got me thinking about the power of the translator. I just thought, wow, these people, firstly, it's not a profession, they're not trained, they're not regulated. There are so many dialects in Greek. Stilou Christofi came from very rural background, very poor. She would have had a really different dialect to, say, a translator who may have come from Greece or from one of the big cities in Cyprus. And then I thought it'd be really interesting if, with the story, I made the translator a woman. There were female translators. If I made it a woman, I made it one person, and it was sort of told through her eyes. So that's kind of how I made it into a novel as such, because all I had was kind of half a story with all the research that I did. I didn't really have the whole picture. So where there were gaps, I sort of fictionalized it and made stuff up.
Did you always plan it as a novel, or was there any point when you started thinking, you know, maybe I'll do this as a true crime, given how massively popular true crime is now?
No, because I didn't want to do it as true crime, because I would have I basically there are blank spaces in the story, and there are things that have been withheld. There are parts in the police statement that are all crossed out that you're not allowed to read, like some of the graphic stuff, obviously, but also there are pages missing, and there's no way of accessing those because I did ask and I was told no. And I just think the responsibility of doing it as a true story, even the responsibility of doing it like this, weighed heavy on me. So
Mm.
I didn't want to go down the road of contacting family and getting into all that, because then they would sort of, in a way, they would mold what you write. And I was very much of the mind of, I want to write another novel. I have since spoken to a member of her family, but it was always a novel that I wanted to do. And the challenge was really how to free myself up from the true story, because I found it very difficult to see where the story was, because I thought this is an awful crime. And if you read all the documents, she sounded like a terrible person. You know, your sort of typical
Mm.
kind of, you know, mother-in-law from hell, as they would call her in the papers. And I
Yeah.
just thought, there's way more to this. This isn't all this woman is. She might be partly this, but that's just not all she is. This woman was at one point younger. She was in Cyprus. Who knows what happened to her there? And that's what really got me interested. That whole idea of everyone, you know, starts from somewhere, and there might be shades of good in someone. And, you know, just I like that idea of playing with not really knowing whether you're meant to like her or not.
It's like you like that idea, but publishers don't like that idea on the whole, do they? I mean, I do
True.
think they've got a bit better at kind of unlikable female characters, and like the ultimate fat character who kind of fucks with your, you know, the kind of your empathy is Ripley. isn't it?
love
I mean,
Ripley.
exactly. And Ripley is like the definitive, and has been the definitive character for what, 70 odd years. And yet you still get publishers going, oh no, we have to know, they have to be black and white. We have to know whether to root for them or not.
I was saying to someone the other day, having watched the amazing Netflix Ripley, I was
It's
saying to
incredible.
someone that if Patricia Highsmith was here now and was trying to get Ripley published, I don't know whether it would get published because he's such a cold character. He certainly wouldn't get published if Ripley was a woman, I don't think. But it's such a cold character. And also, her endings are quite sort of flat. She doesn't sort of tie things up particularly. And
No, there
so
are no bows, are there?
yeah, and I'm always kind of rooting for him, even though I know I shouldn't be. So you kind of want him to get away with it, but he's not likable. This whole idea of being likable. But yeah, I don't think publishers are particularly good at going for stories that are a bit different. But
We should really be leaving.
Zoe, you're can you turn your mic off? Hang on, I'll mute you. Cool. Sorry, Els.
that's all right. One of the things that really interested me when I was doing this, so I was writing this story, and it was such a sad story, such a tragic, horrific crime.
It's so tragic, isn't it?
So grisly, three children. Hella, the woman who was killed, had three children as well. And so you've got three children, you've got a husband, all left without her as well. She lost her
Hella's
life.
her real name, yeah.
Hella is the real name, not Hetty. And I just thought to myself, how can I make this person that committed this terrible crime into a main character? And then I read, I went to another library. I spent a lot of time in libraries, and I read
Any excuse.
some reports from the prison officers. So when someone is condemned to be hanged, they had two prison officers, two wardens in the cell with them at all times, the lights left on, and they're just in there. It's like their duty, and they just sit there with them all the time until they're executed. And they have to report anything untoward to the governor. And I read one report that said to the governor, Stilu Christophe was really distressed today. She was crying. And but then after a while, she started dancing and singing and blowing kisses out of the
So that was real.
cell. And I just, at that moment, I thought, okay, that's how you make this woman human, and that is how you write this character, because there is definitely something there. I really think there was some mental illness there that wasn't really recognized. And so I created a scene that was different to that, but where she behaves in that way. And I just thought, that's when I thought, that's how you get people to actually be concerned for her and sort of care about what happens to her, despite the fact she's committed this crime. Yeah,
because I think there's an idea that if you're reimagining a true story, that it's somehow easier because, well, someone's done all the story work for you. So all you're really doing is going into their heads and deciding whether or not they were wondering what they were going to have to see. But the kind of moral grey area, especially with someone who's alive or who's got family that's alive, I think personally, I think it makes it harder because the idea that when you're at kind of taught either creative writing or at journalism school, you're taught fact is fact.
yeah.
Fact is true, fiction is made up, and so long as you don't blur those two things, you're
It
all
was all
right.
blurry.
It's all blur.
It was all about
Yeah.
the blurring. Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, on one side, in one way, it was easier in that the story is kind of a gift, as in, like, it's, when you hear a true story, you just know it's true. There's something about some of the detail that you think, okay, well, it just rings true somehow. And so, I had the bare bones of it, but then had to fill in the bits in between. I thought, okay, well, what would her relationship with their daughter-in-law started like? What kind of things might have made them have a bit of tension in the house? All that stuff, that whole thread is completely fiction. All I know is that there was animosity between them and tension in the house. who don't really know kind of much more than that. So yeah, that was kind of a plus in that there you've got the bones of a story there. But I do think that the moral side of it is really hard, and that's why I got really stuck on the whole thing of I have to tell it like a true story. I have to tell it, and then once I realised that actually I can go with the facts of the crime and what happened in court as far as we know. As long as it could have happened that way, then I went down that road. But the whole thing about the family is a whole other grey area. So I sort of knew that she had a grandson in this country because the BBC made a documentary quite a few years ago. There's a series called, I think it's called Murder in My Family, where someone who's been affected by murder in their family goes to two barristers and they look at the case again and they take it to a judge and say, was there a miscarriage of justice? And her grandson, Toby Christophe, did this. And so yeah, so I mean, I was thinking, should I contact him? I knew that he spoke English. I figured he was somewhere in the UK, and I was wondering whether or not to contact him or not. And so I decided against it because I thought anything he says to me is gonna colour whatever I do. But before the book came out, I contacted him. And I said, I didn't know how he would take this, but I thought I had to do it. And I spoke to my publisher and they said, this is the way to do it. And I think they were right. It was a good call. I contacted him and said, I've written a book that's inspired by your grandmother. Would you like a copy? Would you like to read it before it comes out? You know, obviously there's nothing you could do to change it. And so I sent it to him. And then we had about an hour and a half chat on the phone. It was really interesting. And he has a very different view. He doesn't believe his grandmother did it, and he has all his reasons. But there's a whole
who
other
does he
story
think
there.
did it?
Well, he
Not
kind
that I
of
want you to give away any ideas for your next book, obviously.
no, it's not for the next book, but he questions the role of his father. So he's not coming out and saying he definitely did, but he's saying there are other possibilities. There's a few theories. There's a theory that Hella, who died, had some friends who came back, male friends. There's that theory of a man at the door.
Yeah.
Apparently there was a witness to a man at the door. There's a theory that the husband
A
did
witness who wasn't Stilu.
wasn't her. Yeah, apparently there was, but that's kind of lost everywhere. I haven't seen that myself. But what's interesting is Toby, the grandson, actually he saw more than I did, because years ago he's been digging through this all his life trying to find out
Yeah, you would
what
be,
really
wouldn't you?
happened. As you would, something like this happens in your family, it sort of takes over, I imagine. And he actually saw the trial transcript, and it was after that he saw the trial transcript that the family in Cyprus, who were actually her children, because he's a stepchild, they withdrew it. They asked for that to be withdrawn. And so, so he saw how she was treated in court and how much was put on the evidence of the neighbour, who he says wasn't trustworthy. And, I mean, who knows? It's all theories. No one knows. No one knows. But
Yeah.
it was, my concern about contacting him was obviously, I've no idea how he's going to take it, but I felt I had to because I knew he was here. And I did, and he was brilliant. And he said it was very hard to read it, but that he was, really interested in it, and he knows everything about the case, obviously. I thought I was, really obsessed with the case and knew everything, but he obviously does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, oh my God, it's such an insane story, isn't it? And I think one of the things that I thought was most interesting, it's such a shame you haven't seen the court reports, is because of her silence. Laurie says she was convinced the husband did it.
Yeah, that was a deliberate red herring as well, but I wondered at the time. Yeah.
Because she would cover for him, wouldn't she? Because she
absolutely would. That's what Toby was saying. She absolutely would, because, Greek mum looking after her son, But you know, that's again, it's just speculation. We don't know. We just
Well,
don't know.
it's all speculation, really, isn't it?
Of course
Because
it is. Yeah.
it's like it only occurred to me when I was like writing notes for this evening that it's the second book we've had this year that's been about voicelessness,
Oh, what's
which
the other one?
wasn't intentional. Theory, she was protecting her granddaughter. How old was her granddaughter?
Okay, so her granddaughter in my book is 8, but actually in the true case, there were 3 children. There were 2 boys and a girl, and they were ranging from the age of about 11 to I think about 8. But I made it one child just to simplify
Yeah,
things.
for
Obviously,
ease,
there's a
yeah.
baby as well in the book, isn't there? But it doesn't get much of a look in. But yeah,
Oh, yeah, there is. Yeah, I was thinking,
yeah.
where's the baby? Yeah, but I suppose also if her dad had done it and then both her parents would be in prison, but then she would have anyway. See, it just turns you into like you just immediately come over all internet sleuth, don't you?
But then there's the whole thing about what happened in Cyprus 25 years earlier, the other crime. So there's that as well.
Yes, well, that's the moment. I mean,
Yeah.
I've completely forgotten what I was going to talk to you about now because we've gone off on this one.
Sorry, I
But
just took you off the track.
no, but that is the point when she gets really. I mean, I think you did an amazing job of managing to keep us not exactly on her side, but feeling for her at a point when you're going, actually, she's already killed someone.
Yeah.
That's the point when she's kind of a lost cause almost, and yet she isn't. So, like, you did massively well to keep that empathy going. How did
Yeah.
how did you like literally think I've got to find a way to
Yeah. And the
retain
way
this?
I did it, I think it's through the granddaughter, because I'm not, everyone understands what it's like to love someone else, even if you don't have kids, you might have kids in your family or just someone else. It doesn't have to be a child, but to love someone and think you're going to lose them forever. So what I was trying to do was to find an emotion that all of us could tap into, that we understood. So the idea of abandonment. So she doesn't understand the language, she doesn't know what's going on, she's locked up. She says she didn't do it. She's completely powerless. Imagine just being somewhere and not speaking the language. She's completely reliant on this young translator who she doesn't really know, but she hopes is going to be there for her. She's writing letters to her brothers, and they're going, yeah, we can't come over. Sorry. And it's like no one comes to visit her, which actually is what happened. Her son came once, but you kind of don't blame him for not coming if she really did it.
No, but
But
the
she's
rest of the
like,
family just they don't come out of it well, do they? Because they just
no, no. So the family, so
abandon her.
he visits her once with the priest, which is what I wrote. Um, and so there is a bit when you read her letters where it starts off very pleading, very sort of like, I didn't do this thing they say I did. She never uses the word murder, never says kill. That's why I put unspeakable acts. So I didn't do these terrible things they say I did. It's not me. Everyone's setting me up. And then gradually she realizes when you read the actual letters, you realize that she realizes no one's coming. No one's coming. No one's going to come and save her. And that's when the fury really unleashes. And when her son did visit her, she spent 20 minutes shouting at him. I think she wasn't well. I genuinely think she wasn't
Yeah.
well, whether she did it or not. Do you want to know what I think, whether she did it or
Yeah, good.
I
Yeah,
I think she did, because so
yeah.
much evidence. I mean, petrol on the shoes, blood on the floor, hiding the wedding ring. I mean, she was seen, in the garden. I
Yeah.
mean,
But
what
if she was
reasons people
seen
have to
prodding the
lie?
fire
I mean,
versus,
get out of
yeah.
that.
But I
Um,
think that kind of whole, in fact, it was really weird because I was interviewing someone yesterday for the podcast and we were talking about PTSD and how even really 10 years ago, people didn't talk about PTSD. So your kind of evocation of her trauma from the
mm,
first murder she committed and not her first husband, her husband, the father of her children, it really made it not understandable because she killed her in such a brutal way, but it did make you have sympathy for her, that kind of sense of her not knowing
Yeah.
who she was killing, almost.
Yeah. I mean, in the actual case, what we know is that she and two other neighbours were accused of killing her mother-in-law in that way, in that brutal way of shoving a torch down her throat. And
And
they,
that's awful. You didn't make that up, did you? That was a
no,
factual.
you see, those are
Yeah.
the details that in a way you kind of can't make it up. It's so
Well, no, you
horrific.
couldn't make that up. That's so
It's
gross.
so horrific. And that was years ago. And I think she was, either it didn't go to, she was acquitted or something, there wasn't any evidence or whatever. Anyway, she was acquitted. It either never went to trial or, found not guilty. But what was really interesting is when you look at all the documents, you can see that everyone knew she'd been accused of this. And I know that, that's not meant to colour how you treat someone in court. It obviously did, because there's like a document from, I think it's the Crown prosecution, saying to the doctor, here are the records for this woman, let me know what you think. By the way, and he uses some word, I can't remember what it is, but basically he's saying she's got previous, and I looked it up and I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay. So I do actually think that's why her defense seems really poor, and why they didn't call for the doctor's records is just that actually happened, and it's kind of unheard of to not even put it forward for sentencing. It's like, okay, she's found guilty, before they sentence her, go, actually, mitigating
Yeah, and they said
circumstances.
she wouldn't let them, but they hadn't paid any attention to what she wanted to that
But the
point. So
thing
why
is,
would they start then?
even if someone doesn't let you, even if someone says, I do not want to be defended on insanity, you have a responsibility, because an insane person would say that.
Yeah,
And also,
exactly.
there is a point when she's sentenced where her defense has the chance to say, this is why you should be lenient on this woman. And that's the point at which they could have put that forward. And it would have made a difference, because there were many sort of like, there's loads of murders around that time in the 50s, and lots of women killing people. And basically, very few of them would be executed. Very few. They would end up in a hospital. Some of them would be pardoned, because there's this idea that a woman could possibly have done
Well,
that.
like the fact that homosexuality was illegal, but being a lesbian wasn't, because women don't do things like
It
that.
doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Let's just
There are a
pretend.
couple of comments I want to raise that are around that same thing,
Sure.
which is like, I'll come to Mel's in a minute, but like Kimberly said, like that should be her being used by everyone around her to basically commit an act of vigilante justice, or almost, as you put it, as like it was almost like an honor killing.
It is like an
And
honor killing.
Nicola's asking if the details of her marriage are fiction.
Yeah, I mean the honor
How
killing,
much of that Cyprus stuff is fiction?
that's made up. So all that is true in Cyprus is she did marry at 14. Okay, so make of that what you will, but to me that's like damage there immediately.
Yes, child abuse. Yeah.
So I wrote that whole scene where she meets her husband. I have nothing on her husband. I know she did write to her husband at the very end, before she was executed, but they were sort of estranged. So all I know is that she married at 14. She was very, very poor. She was accused of this crime of her mother-in-law. In the real case, what happened, and I didn't put this in the book because it's just too complicated for words. In the real case, what happened was her mother-in-law, who she killed in Cyprus, or we think she killed, she herself was accused of killing her own husband. It's just like,
Oh
it
my
just
God.
messes with your head.
But I think kind of what's going on, and what I was thinking about when we were looking at the language and her, the constant judgment of her of not speaking English.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Mel's like generational trauma on top of PTSD.
Yeah.
And it's like on top of, there's a real judgment around her being illiterate in her own
Yeah.
language
Yeah.
with no understanding or even interest in the fact that that might be standard in the place, you know, in
Completely
the place
standard.
that she comes from. She comes from a very rural community and
Yeah,
didn't go to school because you didn't, and because girls didn't. And
yeah.
then that
I mean,
was normal. That doesn't make her stand out.
yeah, I mean, my parents came to England in the 50s. They both left school probably about 14 years old because they had to start working. Yeah, they came from rural background. And
Yeah, I
so,
wanted to ask you about that.
they could read and write, but their education wasn't great because of their circumstances. You know, that's why they came here to try and
Did they
kind of
come
have a
over
better life.
together, or did your mum
No, they
come
came
over with
over
her sister?
separately. They met here. My dad came over, I think it was late 40s, early 50s, my mum a couple of years later. Yeah, they came over and they met here. And people did come because the kind of poverty they had, and also you needed a dowry to marry. And my grandparents had 4 daughters. It was like, and they were really poor. There was no way they were going to find a dowry for anyone. And so, you know, my mum came here and her sister came a few years later. So two sisters stayed in Cyprus, two came here. Yeah, but they met here. But it was really normal. It's really normal. And there are some of my mum's friends couldn't read or write at all in their own language. I remember her saying, "Oh, she doesn't know she doesn't know her words. She doesn't know her alphabet, you know." And so they could speak Greek fine and a few words of English after being here for years, but couldn't couldn't read or write Greek. And that wasn't considered. I mean, you know, it wasn't like so unusual then. And also, you've got to remember that the real character comes from a very rural background where it would have been it's incredibly isolated. People in those backgrounds rarely went outside their village. They might go to the next village. They're not going to go to the town. You know, they have no transport. It's like the idea that everyone is mixing with everyone else and the globalization just wasn't there then. So it's not that unusual.
How much did your mum and her sister tell you about their experience of coming to
I kind of
London?
wish I asked more, I have to say. I mean, as you know, my
Mm.
mum passed away many years ago. My auntie, I did actually interview her for my first book, for She Came to Stay. Because my character in that book is a young woman coming here. And I remember thinking my mum came here, met some good people, had a nice life. And I remember thinking, wow, she was like in her 20s. What would have happened if she fell in with the wrong people? And that's what that book is
Mm.
about. It's about the main character, Dina, falling in with the wrong people. And so I did speak to my auntie about it. And my auntie was a more fearful character than my mom. Her whole
Mm.
personality was a bit more anxious. But what she described was how frightening everything was. I mean, the city, you know, how she didn't know where she was going. She was scared she'd get lost. And, you know, like my dad would say to her, because she lived with my parents for a while, my dad would say to her, okay, we'd go on the bus with her to go to work and say to her, this is the stop you get off at. It was a record shop, you know, when they had vinyl outside. And he said, when you see that,
Yeah.
that's where you get off. She's like, okay. So she did that. And then one day she got lost because the record shop had packed away the records and she didn't know where to get off. I mean,
Oh,
my mum
bless.
told me a story of getting really lost on the underground and going round and round and trying to find, she wanted to come off at Warren Street and she bumped into someone who was Turkish and he spoke a bit because Greeks and Turks sometimes speak slightly similar language. And he sort of said to her, where are you trying to get to? And she told him and he helped her. But, you know, that whole idea of being lost in the underground when you don't speak the language, I mean, crazy. But yeah, they told me a bit. But they worked, again, you know, what happens is people often work in environments where it's other people who don't speak language. So, you know, they were both seamstresses, my auntie and my mum. So they worked in an environment where lots of other foreign women, many Greeks, but other nationalities too, not many English people. So they end up not really speaking that much English, speak a bit
Mm.
and get
Because
by.
there's no need to.
But that whole thing of language and with the in the Zina Pavlou book, the idea that Eva, the translator, has to help her mother as a child when she's going to the doctor and whatever, that's all come from my experience because, you know, whenever I go home, my parents would have like letters and go, this is from the council, what's this for? You know, what do they want now? Or
Mm.
taking them to doctors and, you know, trying to be there for them and being that sort of bridge between both worlds, really.
Yeah, we should talk a bit more about Eva, but I just want to ask you, and I've lost it now, who said it?
What's that?
Was it, I've lost the question. There was a question about, oh, it's Kimberly. Do you think there would have been, well, it's like, in terms of, so the comparison with Ruth Ellis, which, as you say, was only a few months later, really. We know, that her real name was Stilu, wasn't it? Was treated incredibly differently because of because of not being British, not being young, not being attractive, all those things. But do you think that the interest would have been different if the daughter-in-law had also been, if it hadn't been a young, attractive woman, if it had
I
been
don't know. I
a
think,
Greek Cypriot woman, if it had been,
I think what happened played into that whole idea of young, beautiful woman being preyed on by a terrible witch kind of thing,
Yeah, the whole fairy tale
Yeah,
thing,
exactly.
yeah.
It kind of played into that. It played into the mother-in-law, and also I think quite a lot was made of the fact that Hella, the daughter-in-law in real life, sort of had made a life for herself. She'd had kids. She went out and
tried to fit
worked.
in.
Well, it's that
Yeah.
whole thing about the good immigrant, isn't it? It's the idea that
Yeah.
it's fine to come here and try and be part of our world, but you have to adapt. And there's a passage in the book where Jimmy, Eva's husband, says, well, it's all right if we become like them. You sort of lose a bit of yourself to try and become kind of English enough, or whatever it is you're trying to be enough of. It's never okay just to be you and to sort of just come and be you and contribute in your way. You have to kind of adapt. I mean, there was a story just today in the news about a man who, I think he's from Ghana, who basically has been here for decades, and they're saying to him he's not a British citizen. And it's just, it sort of doesn't end. It's that idea that at any moment you can have that rug pulled away from you. It doesn't matter how long you've been here. But going back to your question, I think what it played into was, yes, I think it played into the idea of pretty young wife and mother, and then this sort of harridan of a mother-in-law who comes over and ruins everything with her strange food and her weird religious ways, because she was quite religious, and she did in real life object to the way the children were being brought up. That's what she
It really
said.
made me think of, I remember interviewing Kit Dwell for the podcast about her memoir, and her talking about her granny, her dad's mum, who had come over from, I think, Jamaica, but I could be wrong, and I apologize if I am, and was actually really quite horrible to them, and she was horrible to Kit, and but now, she says, with the benefit of a lot of hindsight and a lot of knowledge about her life, she sees that, her dad had actually had a wife in Jamaica, and he had left and he had come to England and he'd married someone else. And then he'd brought his mum over to help look after those children, spit it out, look after those children when she, as far as she was concerned, this wasn't his real wife. And so she came over, she was an unpaid babysitter, she was an unpaid cook and cleaner. And there's no excuse for being horrible to small children who have nothing to do with it. But there was another story.
Yeah, she disapproved.
There was another perspective.
Yeah. And I suppose you could think that, when someone comes from another country and they see someone else assimilate really easily, they don't see that they're assimilating, they see that they're losing part of themselves. It's like, you don't know who you are anymore. Why aren't you, going to church? And why aren't you speaking Greek? And why are you, not doing all these things that we've taught you to do? You've lost your identity, and it's quite hard to meld both things and to be enough for everyone and to not be you do feel conflicted as a child of immigrant parents. You feel that you're never quite anything enough. You don't fit in. in any way sometimes. Eventually you feel fine about it, I think. But,
Yeah.
certainly growing up it can be difficult for some people. Certainly was
I
for
thought
me.
it was interesting that you said that you never felt British and you never felt
Yeah.
like a Greek Cypriot, that you felt, but you do feel like a Londoner.
Yeah, I feel like London is a place that I feel really accepted. I think it might be because it's so multicultural. Um, and it feels like home. It is home. But there's I don't feel, I had a different upbringing. I don't feel completely English. And I don't feel Cypriot 'cause if I go to Cyprus, I'm sort of Inglesa. I'm the English one, I'm not really, with my weird dialect that's half English, half Greek. And I've lost a lot of my Greek now because I don't really speak it since my parents passed away. So I've lost a lot of that, which is a bit sad. But you just kind of you have to make like a new identity that sort of melds both, really. I just seen that someone says they're upset forever when she was duped by Bert. I know, bloody journalists.
I know, and what a bastard.
Yeah.
Did you have fun with him?
Sorry?
Did you have fun with him?
Yeah. I mean, I just yeah. I wanted her to I wanted the tension between her and her husband, Jimmy, to kind of, simmer a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you was ever there right from the beginning? Because I was trying to remember because I read an early draft. I mean, I remember you telling me about it and me being like, I was really jealous. It's such a good idea. It's like, oh my God, I've never heard of this woman. It's incredible. I remember reading an early draft and thinking, oh my God, this is just such a really brilliant story.
I think, yeah. I
Was it
think,
ever always, though she was there, wasn't she? But
yeah,
she
but
wasn't maybe so
I think the
dominant.
version you read, it was an early draft, and that was before my agent Abby kind of really helped me edit it, and I think I made Eva more of a main character. So you
Mm.
perhaps didn't read her sort of fully fledged. I think I was just trying to, that was the point at which I think I was still thinking I've got to stick to the true story, and I'd made this character but wasn't quite sure how she was going to work, and maybe I brought her in further forward or something because I worked on it for a little while. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like Eva is the kind of slightly more the main character in
Yeah.
this. So was there a sense of you having to do that to get the publishers to be able to cope with her?
Well, I think it's about, letting the reader have the same experience as the translator. I wanted the reader to be kind of ever in a way and be wondering, could she have done it? Could she have done it? I feel sorry for her. Why do I feel sorry for her? What kind of a life has she had? What don't I know? So I kind of wanted that. But I just think that I quite like it when you read a book and you feel like you're one of the characters asking the questions, especially if it's meant to be a mystery or a crime, and then you're sort of trying to figure it out at the same time. I didn't consciously do it so that publishers would like it, but I think it probably helped,
Yeah,
to have
yeah,
her rather than it just be about the Zina Pavlou character. I think that would have been also you need a bit of light relief. So having some scenes in Cafe
yeah,
de
because it's
Paris,
quite dark, isn't it?
I mean,
Yeah,
you can't just have Holloway Prison. I mean, it just is too much, even for me. And I like dark, but when I was
yeah.
writing it, when I was writing the really dark scenes, it was during lockdown, and I had on
Oh my
YouTube.
God.
I know, and I had YouTube on, and I was plugged in, and I literally put into YouTube saddest music, and then it comes up with all this really sad violin music, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write the really sad bit now, where she writes a letter to her husband or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I can't remember what you were asking me, but yeah, I think
I
I
can't
did.
remember either
I
now, but
think
it
it
doesn't
was
matter.
about trying to make it as accessible as possible, having Eva there, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody's saying how much they liked Jimmy and that how kind of real he was, and that kind of they're really pissed off. But then making honey cakes for her to take to Holloway. Anyway, that's a really nice touch, I
Yeah,
think.
that was my attempt to write a nice man. Because I find it really hard. And I wanted to write someone in my book, a man who was a decent person, who kind of supported her, but also had those reactions of like, you're never here kind of thing, and like not really understanding her compulsion, you know. But it's funny because when I've spoken to readers at events and things, that people love Jimmy. Someone said to me, I want one. Like people really like him. I think
Yeah,
it
there's a
that he
bit of a
makes
Jimmy fan
mistakes, but
club.
I don't know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's funny how people
yeah.
like him a lot. Yeah. Yeah, it's
But
also
I
quite
think,
nice writing, having that as a bit of as a difference to the whole stuff going on in court and in prison, to have the relationship just to mix it up a bit, because you can't read, well, you can, but it then just becomes very heavy if it's
yeah,
all.
I mean, given the subject matter you were already working with, and then the whole torch thing, she just, you did need, it could have been a bit relentless, couldn't it? And
Yeah,
somehow,
I was actually one of the edits I had to take in. My editor said, we need some more scenes at the Café de Paris. I'm like, okay, I'll put some frocks in and
yeah.
make it a bit more, a little bit of glamour just for a few pages.
Did you, presumably you'd done a lot of that research for the first book?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of have got a handle on 50s London, not, I've sort of done a lot of research over years. So that's something I feel quite confident in. And then I just look up stuff that I need to. Yeah, yeah. So that makes it a little bit kind of easier when you're writing locations and things.
So I just want to ask everybody who's here who liked Zina. And I want to ask you, did you like Zina? And how you felt about her change while you were writing?
I think I liked her abruptness, her honesty with Ever about, kind of how she knew that the men were in charge. She knew that no one liked foreigners, she knew that. I'm not sure I liked her. I think I really felt sorry for her. I think for me it was more like she'd been damaged by life, and I'm not saying what she did
Mm,
was understandable, but I think I really felt for her. Yeah, I did really feel for her. I felt like she was
yeah.
completely lost.
And it felt like, I think it was Mel who said earlier, and then the comments rolled and I forgot to say, it felt like they were always going to hang her, like they wanted to hang her.
Yeah,
But
I
she
think
didn't, no
that
ma-
too.
she did bad stuff, yeah, but she didn't stand a chance.
And also she didn't sort of, she didn't
Oh yeah,
admit
the
she wasn't
cinema was
remorseful.
lovely.
Sorry?
Di saying that her scene with Anna at the cinema was
Oh,
lovely.
thank you. Yeah, I think that might be my favorite scene as well. I always seem to write scenes at the cinema, which is weird because they're
Yeah,
not
you like a
based around
cinema though, don't you?
Hollywood. Yeah, it's very strange. So I wrote
Yeah,
a scene at cinema in the first book as well. Yeah, yeah. I think
yeah.
it's
I mean,
I
it's
sympathise with her, or kind of tried to understand her, the one
yeah,
that I
feel for her
created.
maybe. Like everybody, a lot of people are saying it's not a matter of liking her, but at the same time, not hating her and not,
I think it's
just
about it not being so
feeling for
black
her.
and white. What you think at the beginning
Yeah,
isn't always what is true, and the fact this person isn't just one thing. They're not just pure evil. They're not just, they can be those things, but they're not that all the time. There's more to people, It's like at some point that person is a child, or maybe had a carefree moment, and, it's like, just as it's more complicated. Things aren't just black and white. That's what I was trying to get across, really. And also with Ever's moral kind of dilemma of not translating things when she thinks she should. And does that make her bad? Or is that what you would do?
yeah,
That's that kind of thing. It's like challenging, what would you do? How would you feel? Because I think I understand why she wouldn't translate things, but she's not doing her job. So
yeah. It's like
there's that.
Mel's just said. There's a human being. Like Bert says, there's a human being behind the story,
Yeah,
no matter
exactly.
what they've done. And she has
Yeah.
been so kind of used.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I just wanted people, what was really interesting as I did this, people, but the sort of response I seem to have is that people start off really not liking Zina. And then when they see that she's vulnerable, and then ever gets sort of caught up in the whole thing. And then you see that maybe she's ill, maybe she's actually not all there, and maybe there's more going on. And oh my God, what happened inside? And suddenly you find yourself in the middle of this thing, and it's not as easy as you thought it was. It's not as, and that's what people seem to find when they read the book, is like what they thought at the beginning keeps shifting. And that's what I was trying to do anyway. So some people have said that that is what they got from it.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to start from a point of view, like we touched on earlier, and there were some comments about the fact that, you know, you do such a good job of building up the tension in the house. And it's easy to start from the point of view, or natural even, of, you know, your mother-in-law comes to stay, and within 5 minutes, she's like telling you haven't. Yes, I can do things. Why I never want to be in a jury for murder. It's like we've all had our mother-in-laws going. I remember a friend of mine saying to me, you know, she just spent like 500 quid in Sainsbury's at Christmas, and, you know, spent the whole day cleaning, and her mother-in-law, she's divorced now, her mother-in-law turned up and kind of went, oh, it's nice that you don't feel like you need to make an effort. And she's just like,
and with that one sentence, that's it.
Yeah, that's Christmas.
I mean,
Nice,
you know,
Christmas. And that's, I think you start from that point of view, even though, I mean, Hedy isn't that likable either. You do start from the point of view of poor Hedy, this bloody, you know, woman's come in and she's, you know, really rearranging the cupboard.
It's really interesting you say that about Hedy, because it wasn't my intention for her not to be likable. It was my intention for her to be sort of quite spirited and not take any crap from her mother-in-law, and be like, you know, sort of trying to kind of hang on to what she had and not let her husband be kind of swayed too much. A lot of people don't like her, though. It's interesting that.
Yeah, no, Lisa saying I didn't like her at all. No, I didn't much like her. And I kind of almost, there was a point where I had to give myself a bit of a talking to, because I was like, you know, when Hedy was like, say it in English, you know. No, nobody liked her. If you look at the chat box, nobody liked her. I didn't like her. And I was like, she's saying to him, say it in English. And no, look, it's all right. No.
There's a lot of hate here for Hedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mocking of Zina. Yeah. That's probably the turning point, isn't it?
And the kind of the way both her son and Hedy, they do use her as like basically an unpaid domestic slave.
This is what happens.
But they won't even trade off and let her look after the grandchildren as well, which is what she wants. But I did feel like, hang on, you're blaming Hedy. He's being at the very least gutless, and actually much more likely duplicitous. But you're blaming her. Come on, internalized misogyny here.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? That it's interesting how people really don't like her, and that was never an intention at all. So
I don't think I've ever seen an unpopular character like this before.
I just didn't want her to be like a very passive kind of victim, which is what she, you know, she was at the, you know, she was killed. So I didn't want her to, I wanted her to be kind of quite bullshit. But yeah, I think that's just really interesting.
But again, that's also the interesting, the language. They're different personality types, they're different generations, they're different languages, they're different backgrounds, and everything is. Yeah. The son was a spineless little worm, absolutely, and spoiled brat. He was the classic spoiled son, isn't he, of a mum whose son can do no wrong.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, yeah, I mean, I've seen a few of them.
Luckily managed not to marry one.
No,
we're running out of time, so just tell us a little bit about your next book. Is that another more 50s London?
It's set in...
Hang on, sorry, I have to stop you. Nicola likes the prison governor. How so? I'm trying to
remember what her name is. I can't remember what the prison governor's name is, but yeah, anyway, interesting choice.
Random. Yeah, random.
That's good. I'm glad you liked her.
Yeah, tell us about your next book.
I've been told I could tell you what it's called, actually. It's called A Beautiful Way to Die. And it's
I like that.
Thank you. It's set in 1950s Hollywood and Ealing Studios. And it's about a young actress and an older actress, and about studio fixers who will do anything to kind of sweep corruption under the carpet, and obviously there has to be murder in it. So there is crime, but it's very sort of glamorous, film noir-y, and yeah, that's coming out next spring.
And how much of it have you written?
I've got a board here which tells me I've written 35,194 words.
Oh, you haven't quite got to the point where it feels like a book, have you? For me, it was
Not
always
really,
40,000
no,
words.
but there's sort of 3 threads. I've written one. I've just started the second one today. Third one is shorter. So, you know, have to deliver it in September. It'll be fine. I keep telling myself. But
It will be. It totally will be.
Yeah,
Just
I'll be
get
fine.
on with it. It's once I feel like once you get over 40,000 words, and I'm so far from that myself, I don't know what I'm talking about. It starts to feel like a book. And then once you get over 80,000 words, it's almost like riding a bike downhill, because you get a bit like,
Oh yeah,
the
there's
end.
this kind of weird thing at the end where it sort of runs away with you a bit. It runs away with you a bit. But yeah, so it's nice. I just decided I wanted to write something that wasn't set in a prison. And I also wanted something that wasn't domestic.
Fair enough.
Yeah, this is really domestic. And I loved writing it, but I wanted something that wasn't domestic. There is a Greek character in it. There is a Cypriot character in it, because I just thought, why not? And
Yeah,
but
well, you've got that knowledge for free.
yeah, yeah. So it's Hollywood and Ealing Studios, mostly Hollywood. So yeah, so it's nice doing different stuff and watching loads of old films, which is, you know, the best kind of research.
Oh, really good. And it's kind of it's Chandler 50s. Is it Chandler's 50s or
Yeah, I think it's like 40s, 50s, but it's that whole kind of you know, everything is really glamorous, but actually the flip side is that it's really sordid and dark, and all kinds of awful crimes that celebrities commit get just like pushed away. But yeah, it's that.
Oh, that sounds
Those
really
two
good. Well,
things. Thank you.
you've been invited back.
Oh,
So
excellent. Thank you. Who said that? Di. Thanks,
with
Di.
we're out of time. Quickly, nobody's sitting there with a desperate burning question that they haven't asked. I mean, we could easily talk for another hour, but
Your questions
best
have been
not.
great.
No.
Thank you, everyone. That's been great.
No, it's good. I could tell from the chat last weekend that it was going to be. So that's all we've got time for. I'm just going to quickly use your last 30 seconds to plug next month's book. If anybody didn't see today's newsletter, next month's book is Clover Stroud's memoir, The Giant on the Skyline, because I thought we probably should have a little bit of non-fiction just to bring the changes a bit. If you haven't messaged me about a free copy, get in there quick. There's still a few left. And that's it. Thanks, Eleni. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
It stopped being weird after the first few minutes.
I'm glad to hear it. Thanks, Sam.
And thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks for coming. Right.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Night. Bye.